Hi, I'm Loretta Pederson and I work in Sydney at a small non-government organisation. And I guess in the last few years I've had quite a number of people coming to see me to talk about the impact for them of having suicidal thoughts, and also in my own family life and life with friends, a number of people have experienced these sorts of thoughts. So I've become really quite interested in the question, what can narrative conversations offer us when we're responding to people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts? So I actually think it can offer us quite a lot. So I'm going to share about some of the things that are supporting me in the work, and what I've heard from others has been helpful. So when I say narrative conversations, I'm referring to therapeutic work that draws on the ideas of Michael White and David Epstein and other therapists who are continuing the work as well. So I thought for a minute we could perhaps consider what it might be like to experience suicidal thoughts, to put ourselves in that situation just for a moment, because I think it can be very distressing for people. I'm sure you've noticed this if you're meeting with people who've experienced suicidal thoughts, that the person could be being told things like they're worthless and that they deserve to die. And that's very distressing. It could be quite terrifying. They might feel like they have no choice in the situation, that this is a command that they have to obey. And it can be very traumatic. So a lot of the people that I'm meeting with have experienced multiple trauma in their lives, and that's part of the context of what's brought the thoughts. But then also the actual experience of these types of thoughts is in itself traumatic. It can bring questions for the person like, does this mean I'm mentally ill? Does this mean people will think I'm crazy? Will it change the way others view me? If I do die, what effect would that have on my children? What effect would that have on my partner? And this can bring additional guilt and sadness when the person's already feeling very low, very distressed. There could also be spiritual beliefs the person holds, which have a lot to say about despair and suicide, and that can add to the feeling of trauma as well. So I was reading an article, a co-researching article by Marilyn O'Neill with a number of young people, which I found really helpful in also hearing a bit more about how convincing these thoughts can be and what the young people found helpful. So that's called A Conversation with Angela, Brett and Jess about suicidal thoughts, failure and resistance, and that's available on the Dulwich Centre Friday afternoons site, where Marilyn and Gay have done a video. So if you have a look there, that's really worthwhile. So if you imagine for yourself, what would it be like to experience this kind of barrage of thoughts every day or for a period of time, at an intense level or at a lesser intense level, just to be in that experience? What would it be like? How would it affect you at work, for example? Would it affect your concentration? Would it affect your confidence in what you can do? How would it impact your relationships with your children or your partner, if you have a partner? And what would it get you thinking about yourself, about your sense of identity? How might those things be impacted? Because this is what the people that we are meeting with are experiencing. And to give you a bit more of an idea, I have permission from a woman who's calling herself Taylor, and she would like to share some of her experiences with you. And she's actually really keen to have her experiences shared. And she's allowed me to use her documents in the past. And she said to me, I spoke to her today, and we're no longer working together, but we sometimes like to have a little catch-up conversation. And she said that if her experiences and writing them down and sharing them can help someone else get through the experience faster, or even get through it at all, then she would feel that it was really worthwhile. And so this part of the document, it's got three parts. The first part is talking about the impact on her life of the suicidal thoughts, and she calls them rushing thoughts. That's her experience near description. So life had been difficult for a while when the dark thoughts first started. The dark thoughts were, how can I escape this world? How can I escape this life? These thoughts were very fast. I call them the rushing thoughts. There was no space for other thoughts. There was no time to think of my family or housework or friends. With the rushing thoughts so constant, I felt exhausted, and the tiredness from not sleeping made it worse. Then I was put on medication which made me so tired it was hard for the kids to wake me. It was exhausting just to try to exist. This made things difficult with my husband. I tried to explain why little tasks were so hard and why I had no energy or enthusiasm, but for a long time he didn't get it. The rushing thoughts took away my happiness for life. So you can hear in that the impact on her relationship with her husband, on how available she was for the children or not available, and the impact on friends, her relationships with friends and doing things around the house. I'm also interested in how can we be supportive? How can my response or our responses not add to the distress and trauma? How can they actually be supportive and really listening to people? And how can I assist this person to be less influenced by these attacks from the suicidal thoughts? And how could the attacks perhaps be less intense, or how could we manage it so that they're coming less often? And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I have at times, and other colleagues I've spoken to have said they too have, is that sometimes we can be invited into a feeling of distress as well, or even panic, because it can be really hard seeing people in such a difficult place, and particularly when we're meeting with people at work it can be difficult, but if it's also someone in our family or friendship circle it can be additionally difficult. And at times we might feel a sense of panic, particularly if we're worried for someone's immediate safety. And so I've been thinking about, how do I really pay attention to what the person is saying and not have these other feelings that I might be experiencing distracting me away from what they're saying. So I found a few ideas that help me get into this zone of calmness where I'm more present for the person. So what I do is I call on other people in my mind and create a little support team for myself. So you've probably heard of the idea of using support teams for the people we meet with, but I found it really helpful to have people available that I can have as a support to me. So the first people I think of, I heard of them through an article that Laurie Stout wrote, and it is called Talking About the Suicidal Thoughts Towards an Alternative Framework. And in that she describes some of the stories and uses the words of some women that she's meeting with. And I learnt many things from that, but one of them was that the women were saying that they really, in that moment when they're sharing about the suicidal thoughts, they really want someone to just listen to the distress and really hear the pain, how difficult it is. And so this informs me and tells me to focus on having a rich description from people of the impact on their life of the suicidal thoughts, and to not rush through it or whitewash it or try and distract them away from it, but to really let the person know that they've been heard and understood, and that I'm willing to clarify with them, just so that we both know if I am understanding really what they're saying. Also, not to use those sort of convincing kind of questions like, well, what about your kids? Because they said this adds to guilt and despair when they're already feeling pretty terrible. Another thing that one of the women mentioned was that sometimes there's silencing and shaming in society, or the fear from others that if these ideas are talked about, then it will make it worse. But she was saying that to talk about the suicidal thoughts gives them light. So I'm interested in really hearing the particularities of the person's experience of the thoughts, what the thoughts are saying to them, to give them light, to put them out on the table and really know what it is that we're dealing with here. And also I like using externalizing questions and conversations, because it not only creates a distance between the person and the problem, but it also creates options. So it makes it seem like there's more options available or more visible, creating choice. An example of that would be if the thought was convincing the person that they deserve to die because they're worthless, and if we can look at that as a tactic and not as the truth, then it means they don't have to obey that thought, which is really good news. And if it was a command to die, for example, the person doesn't want to die, they feel like they're being told to and it's fate and they've got no choice over that, that's a very powerless feeling. So we're interested in creating a sense of agency. And so I'd be thinking about having a conversation where we're deconstructing ideas of fate, like where did these ideas come from? Where did you hear about them? What's got you thinking this? And then also thinking about once we've externalized it and we see the suicidal thoughts as something that's acting on the person's life, or it's a force that they're up against, then it leads to considerations of what's the intention of the suicidal thoughts, and does it match up with the person's intention? So I found that to be helpful, and people have told me that these types of conversations where we're using externalizing questions are helpful. So something I've noticed, and I just wanted to mention, was that the thoughts can be very sneaky and change tactic. So we have to be careful not to assume that because we've had a previous conversation with someone that we know about the suicidal thoughts or what they might be saying, because it might not be the current tactics and it might not be the current impact, could be different. So I just wanted to mention that because, I don't know, these thoughts are pretty tricky and they will use anything they can to make life difficult for people. An example of this would be if someone's working very hard to get through the thoughts and not obey them, and that can be very exhausting. So it could use thoughts, that suicidal thoughts could even use that against them by saying something like, oh, you're so tired, you're exhausted, just do it now and then it will be over and done with and you can rest. Another one might be using the person's own values, what is most precious to them, such as the love for their children, and twisting it and saying something like, your children will be better off without you, so if you kill yourself, that's the ultimate sacrifice. That's how you're showing them that you love them, would be if you killed yourself. So to have these thoughts out in the open, able to be looked at, I think it's very important so that we can raise some questions about the truth status of these thoughts. And if I still feel like anxiety is raising itself a little bit for me, then I would call on other therapists as well in my mind, and people who I trust, people who I respect. I would think, oh, I wonder what they would say now, what would they be curious about? And it's really interesting that it's like that third person position question you might ask, if somebody, you were asking them about their skills and they said, oh, I don't know, and then you might ask a question like, well, could you have a guess about what your friend might say? So I use that for myself and I think, what would so-and-so say right now? And it's amazing that I suddenly have more ideas and more focus. I realise that I do know things, and it was just anxiety robbing me of my knowledge. And suddenly I think, oh, I could ask them about the context, what led up to these thoughts. I could ask them how they've gotten through it before, what was helpful, what are they thinking about when they're reducing the impact of it. And then I could ask them about their support teams and who they might want to have, who might already be available in their life or who we could add into their support team. Another thing that I find focusing for me and encouraging is to really honour that the person has even turned up for the session. And I'm honouring them in my mind, but I'm also asking questions that would bring this forward in the conversation. So I think that they must have some hope for the conversation for them to even have come here. We also do home visits as well. So, if they open the door to me, how was it that they did that? When suicidal thoughts are around, things can be extremely difficult. And, as you heard in Taylor's document, and a lot of effort can be required to even get out of bed. So if someone's caught the bus, they've gotten dressed, they've caught the bus, they've turned up on time or even late, I don't mind. How is it that they got here? I think it must have taken a lot of effort, and so I think of these as actions for living. So we're moving now from the externalizing conversations map and into the reauthoring map. So I'm imagining that they must have a lot of skills to even be here, that they're alive, they're in my office. They must be putting a lot of work in to that. So I'm really interested in asking questions around that topic. Also, if someone's telling me about a history of suicidal thoughts, they might say, oh, the thoughts have been around for 2 years, or I might, get a new referral and it says the person's had 4 attempts on their life. I think, well, they must know a lot about how to get through. Like 2 years, that's a long time to be getting through this and living with it. And so how have they gotten through this before? So I might be asking, like, were there certain thoughts that you held on to in the dark times? Were there things that you did when the suicidal thoughts were at their strongest that helped you get through? And they might answer, well, I think of my kids. And then this might lead to an exploration of their values, their hopes for their lives, their hopes for their kids' lives, the hopes for their relationship. But it's a very different conversation than if I started with that. Well, what about your kids? It's really coming at it from a different angle. As I mentioned before, something that I like to use is documentation. And when I was speaking with Taylor about what's the impact of using documentation for her and sharing ideas, she said that when she was in that very dark space, because she's in a different place now, that it helped her to get through, knowing that this wasn't all for nothing, that she was sharing her ideas. So she said, my learning is for other people. And if it does help someone get through it faster or get through it at all, it was worth it. She also said she would like people to be patient. She wants workers to know that, she said, don't think people are doing nothing. Every step is a battle. Just getting up is a battle. But finally life is good. And she said she's not just got a clear mind, but it's a whole new world now because happiness and direction are back in her life. So, we'd call this enabling contribution, this idea that people can contribute back to others or contribute back to our work and our knowledge. And she's also given me some ideas about what is helpful and not so helpful. And if I can, I'll attach that and share that with you as well. So if you'd like to hear more about documentation, then David Newman's got a video on the Friday afternoons. You could watch that, and there's an article attached to that which he wrote. And I mentioned support teams before. So something that I'm becoming increasingly aware of it, I guess, is the idea of building a support team with people of who they could call on in their own lives. And we might be on that team, but they would also have a lot of other people on the team too. Or so I might ask some questions like, I got these questions from different therapists and from reading different articles, so I'm sorry I don't have an actual reference. But one of them is, who knows something about you that is different to what negative thoughts are saying? What might this person say about this harsh attack on you? If you took a guess, what might they tell me about your skills or the values that you have that the negative thoughts or the suicidal thoughts are overlooking? What story might they tell me about these skills? Who in your life knows how hard you're struggling to live and is supportive of you? So I like that phrase, struggling to live. It's really honouring, I think. What might they notice about your skills in getting through? What support might they offer you in the dark times? And what support would you like or need at those times? And yeah, I was talking with Marilyn O'Neill, and she was talking about the different roles that people might have. So a question might be like, would different people have different roles? For example, there might be someone that they could call in the moment when things were very tough and speak to that person straight away. Or there might be someone else who's passed away and they might keep a photo of them, or they might remember in their mind that that this person knows how much they're trying, knows how hard things are, and loves them and is supportive of them. Another question might be, how would you let someone on your support team know you wanted or needed help? And Gay and Marilyn did a video as well, so that's on the Friday Afternoons website or page. And there's also, as I said before, you can look up other articles attached to that. So I'd suggest, if you're interested in hearing a bit more about support teams, you could have a look at that. And in Laurie's article that I mentioned earlier, she was speaking about a collaborative position when we're inquiring with people about their safety. And so I guess the more I've had conversations with people and the more questions that I ask, the more I realise that people know a lot about where they're at that time, the impact of the thoughts on them, and what it's like for them, and how safe they are. So I might ask some questions like, what have the thoughts been saying? What have the thoughts been getting you doing? Like, it could be isolating you from friends. Sometimes people might have bought tablets just to get ready but not actually take action on that yet. It could invite carelessness into driving, those sorts of things. I might ask them a question about how they would rate the thoughts, how intense they think they are. And people would have their own scale for this, but something that I was thinking of was it could be something from, life is too hard, I want to escape. The next level up might be, maybe dying's an option. A more intense thought that could be quite scary and require more support and attention could be a thought like, you could kill yourself now and this is how you could do it. But again, I'd be checking with the person how they're feeling about that, because they might think, yeah, that sounds really terrible, but I know I'm not going to do it because I want to be here for my child, or I know I don't need to listen to these thoughts. So, and another thought could be, do it now. Also, Laurie mentioned about immediate physical needs. It's very hard to think clearly, and people can have more amplified sense of their emotions if they're sleep deprived or if their body is starving. And I'd be particularly aware of this if someone has an issue with eating. Sometimes I even keep a little yogurt in the fridge or an apple or something if I know someone's coming in who hasn't eaten for a while, because it can really impact their ability to concentrate in the session, but also their sense of how desperate things are can be very heightened. I would also be wanting to activate their support team. And in an early session, probably the first session, I would be letting them know the limits of our confidentiality within our service, and asking them if there was a time of crisis or a time when they needed extra help, who would they prefer that I contact? Would it be their partner? Do they have a mental health worker that they get on really well with, or a GP who they trust? And asking for the phone number for that person. And then if we felt during the session that we did need to call somebody, then we could ring them together and arrange for a visit that day, or see what the next step might be with that. It might be that they don't feel that they're in a crisis situation or an emergency, but they're feeling like they would need some extra support, but they don't have anyone in their life that they've spoken to about it. So we might talk about who could be someone that you would tell, and how would you go about speaking to them about these dark thoughts. I call them dark thoughts, but the person might have a different name. And also the availability of 24-hour support numbers. And then we'd be using those remembering conversations to be reconnecting with the support team as well. Also, as we've been talking, perhaps we could have been writing down some of the skills that they have in getting through or what's helped them in the past. And if I didn't have a lot of time, I could just write that really quickly, and then there's someone in my office who I'm fortunate enough that can laminate things for me. So in the past I've done like a little just business card sized list, and the person has been able to have it laminated and put it in their wallet or carry it in their handbag. Or if there's more time, then we might do a document together, which is a richer description of their skills in getting through. And as you saw with Taylor's document, it can also be valuable to write down the impact of the thoughts, because people want to notice that they're really heard. And so towards the end, as we're going through the time together, I would be revising with them their skills and getting through. And then towards the end of the session, I might be asking something like, as we've discussed these skills in getting through, what stands out to you from this conversation? And they might say something like, well, I've come through worse than this before, or I know this will pass, I can get through it. Or I'm pretty strong and I know how to ignore the negative thoughts. And then I'll be asking, well, how are you feeling now? Are you okay if we finish in a few minutes? And what thoughts might you hold on to, or what might you do if the dark thoughts do have another go at you? So we're preparing for that possibility. So these are some of the things that I've found helpful, and some of the people I've been meeting with have told me that they've found useful. So I'd be really interested in hearing more from you about what you have found helpful. And yeah, we can continue this conversation. So thanks a lot for joining me today. Bye.